Welcome to Rick on Life. I'm your host, Rick Amitin, and we're brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Media Project, and we're excited to have you here. This is where we talk about how to impact others by impacting ourselves first. We have a great guest today with Scott Biddulph, and I want to introduce Scott to you. Scott is a published writer, author, and poet from North Georgia. He attended the University of North Georgia in 2013, where he earned a BA in English with a concentration on publication and creative writing. His publications include Apples of Gold, an ebook, a collection of inspirational short stories and poems published in 2010, and a paperback, Voices from the Heart, published in 2012. His poetry is also published in Papers and Publications Undergraduate Research Journal, Volume 3, in 2014, and the award-winning Chastity Review in the spring of 2015, among other places. He is currently working on publishing poetry, creative nonfiction, academic essays, and his own memoir. He is also the founder of 2 Drops of Ink, a literary blog, which has been rated as the top 50 writing blogs for writers by the PositiveWriters.com group. Scott, welcome. It's good to have you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I'm honored.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. I mean, I have personally, become an active participant in the 2 Drops of Ink community, and have learned and enjoyed being there, and have made some friends, on the site, people that we interact with on a regular basis. And let's just start. Tell me a little bit about your story, and then we'll talk a little bit about the site.
Well, I lived a long time wanting to be a writer. I always had a dream to be a writer, but there was a couple things going on in my life. First of all, I ran a business that took too much. When you run a successful business, it takes a lot of time, and so I was never able to focus on those dreams. And also, I rode with a motorcycle club, which was sort of an alternative lifestyle that I hid from my clients. And in 2008, when the crash came, I sort of had to reinvent myself, and I started a personal blog, 2 Drops of Ink, and I also soon after that changed my life and became a Christian and left the motorcycle club world. And I think that led into me being able to follow through on my dreams. It was a positive rather than a negative, and so what was once a personal blog that really had a bunch of my own musings, which weren't always that interesting, has flourished into quite a successful, and I'm very humbled by it, literary blog. So,
right. So you got up to two drops, and it started as a personal blog, and then you have migrated that into a literary blog with a large following. I think you're about 20,000 or so. On that, and so. It's a vibrant, active community, so I really encourage people to get there. But as the thing migrated and began to grow exponentially, it took on a different flavor and a different philosophy. So tell us a little bit about how 2 Drops operates today.
Well, what really happened to me, Rick, in my own personal career as a writer and dealing with editors, as we all do, if you're a writer, you're going to have some hard knocks. You got to have thick skin if you're going to be a writer, because you're going to get way more no's than yeses. But there was something that I began to notice in my career, particularly when I worked in the university system as an intern in the university press, and that was that a lot of editors claim to be subjective, but they're really rather objective. Some of that is because of the constraints of time and the amount of submissions they get. Some of it obviously is personal bias, and that's unfortunate. And so I try as an editor to be very honestly, I try to look at people's work, and if it has any potential, I will ask them to revise and resubmit. I will work with them, and through that process, we have discovered a lot of wonderful writers that I think other editors would have rejected, and I think we found something new there. I think we're a different animal in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have a team. Tell us a little bit about the team and what they do.
Yeah, sure. Lydia is our social media coordinator. She's been with us really since the beginning, the first migration. We originally were on Blogspot, and that's where I started the personal blog in 2011. Marilyn came to me sometime in 2011, a dear friend of mine that I've known 20 years, and she said, hey, I see you got a blog, and I really, she sort of had a fear of starting her own blog, and she said, do you mind if I write on it? And I said, might as well. I really don't use it that much, and what's on there, you know, I'm not sure if it's really any good. It had a small following at the time. So Marilyn started to write, and then Marilyn brought Lydia, and then some other people came along that are no longer with us for various reasons, but we started to just gain this, I don't really understand why, but we just started to gain this following. And then we soon realized that we needed to move. We moved to WordPress, and we really started to grow exponentially from there. But the main thing was we began to attract writers that were widely published, prolific writers, not only here in the United States, but in Europe and Asia. And it's quite humbling, to be honest with you. At the time,
I'm getting to know Marilyn. I'm already a huge fan of Lydia. I mean, I just think she is such a, just a wonderful person, very helpful.
Yes.
Always doing, positive things and making contributions toward other people. And, that's up my alley. So, I mean, I really like that.
Yeah.
I think, one of the reasons that you're doing so well with Two Drops of Ink is some of what you reflected to, but you mentioned, I really don't know why, but you're having such success, but I think you're having such success because you are helping people. And there are places, that people would just like somebody to take an interest in them, to offer them some validation and maybe some direction and help, with their writing. And, writing is such a big thing in our world. I mean, we're looking at about 1 million books a year that get published, and then all of the articles and publications and, all of the things around writing, so writing is a big part of our everyday lives, even for people who aren't writers. I mean, we're all, affected by what's being put out into the world. And so I love the fact, that you'll take people that aren't known and give them some help, and some encouragement. And, there's a lot of writing advice there on your site. And people, you know this as an editor a little bit more than I would, but what are some of the challenges that, for instance, a new writer will encounter when they're trying to write and to discover whether they have a true talent and gift and get noticed a little bit? So what are some of the things that they face that you feel like you address at Two Drops?
Well, I think one of the things that's unfortunate for people when they approach other magazines, be they print or online, when they encounter editors, I think what they don't understand is syntax and grammar is unfortunately so scrutinized by a lot of editors, and I understand that. Look, I'm a grammar guy. I will tell you, I say all the time, I'm a much better editor than I am a writer. I'm a grammar nerd. I'm not a grammar Nazi, but I'm a grammar nerd. I love it.
Right.
But an editor will take a few sentences, and if they see grammatical errors or errors, strong errors in syntax, they will dismiss something. I personally, not that I'm some genius, I just think it's from my personal experience. I want to take the time to read through the entire article, and if there is substance there, if there is something substantive there that I can take and talk to the writer and say, hey, let's do some developmental editing, let's change this and this and then this, and I really think this will be a good piece, and the writer's open to that, and frankly, sometimes some of them aren't, and that's, I hate it for them. But if they do that, the ones that have been so excited when we've published it and it turned out that people responded positively to their writing. I think I sort of have a knack for seeing that, and I also believe highly in the universal principle of sowing seed, and I know that if I give more than I receive, that you just can't outgive.
Right.
I'm a Christian, so I'm just
Yeah, and I think people need to be aware, and it's hard sometimes because I went through this when I wrote my book, and I had an editor. I actually had a book coach, and who was scrutinizing everything that I wrote, and I'm not a grammar guy. I'm a word guy. I love words, and if I didn't have to put them into proper sentence structures, I mean I'd be king of the hill. But it's it's learning to write, and so you really do need to not be so in love with what you wrote,
yes,
but be open to writing itself, so that when you receive critique, it's not personal. It's not about you as the individual. It's about the craft and art of writing. And so when people are open to input, and critique, it really moves you, it moves you down the road. Mm-hmm. If you take it personal, it can really stunt you, and you can withdraw, and then you're stuck. I mean, whether you realize it or not, you just put yourself, into a position of not moving, and you're staying there. So, yeah, it's really encouraging. You talk a lot about collaborative writing on the site. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, we kind of stumbled into that concept, really. What we began to realize, and this goes back to our principle of sowing seed, is that, and rightly so, I'm not demeaning this, but many of us who blog or who want to become professional bloggers are more focused on branding ourselves and our site. And so I wrote an article that people can find on the site called, I believe the title is something along the lines of, I feel like a fern at the bottom of the redwood forest. And that, I think you as an author understand, trying to find the light of day for your book amongst the millions of books, especially with print on demand.
Right.
With collaboration, what we discovered is this: look, if we can create sort of a virtual library, which is what a literary blog is supposed to be, if we can create a place where people can come together and not only share good writing, but also promote and conjoin audiences. You're bringing your audience to me, I'm bringing my audience to you. It creates a larger, more beneficial audience for everyone. So I'm suppose there are some at times that as editor, I receive a lot of emails, and I've had some people question, well, aren't you just really still promoting yourself? Oh yeah, we're promoting the site, but everyone benefits. So it's really a win-win, and that's what we hope. And so far that's been successful, and that's what we mean by collaborative writing.
Well, we wouldn't recognize our world without critics. So it's just part, it's just part of it. When people are coming to the site, I know when I first came, it took me a little bit to kind of stumble through the site and explore the site, and figure out, okay, where can I connect?
Mm-hmm.
But just give us a couple of things. You say a young writer, and I don't mean age, new to the writing scene.
Yeah.
When they come to the site and they start interacting with the site, what's a couple of the benefits that right off the bat they should be able to recognize for
Well,
themselves?
first of all, we've been really blessed, as reflecting back on one of your questions about our team. We've got a pretty large team of monthly contributors who are very good writers. Dr. Noelle Stern recently joined us as a monthly contributor. This lady is well known. She is a writing coach. Her particular concentration is with helping PhDs write their dissertations. So this woman knows what she's talking about. So right off the bat, they can come in and really get some good information about grammar, syntax, writing techniques, writing advice, not only from novice writers who have now begun to produce very good writing, but also from some very seasoned writers. That's all there for them to take part in, and it doesn't cost them a dime.
Right. I mean, that it's really great. You also take pitches.
Mm-hmm.
And so talk a little bit about the idea of pitches and how people can do that and what you look for when people are pitching you.
Yeah, we've had that happen several times. We pitched to other blogs where we have collaborated with other blogs. Some of the names escape me at this moment, but some well-known writing and other literary blogs who have pitched to us and said, hey, let's do something together, a cross-promotional blog. Right. We've had some success with that. But in terms of writers who are seasoned, I say to them, pitch to me something that you would like to write about. And we've had some success with that. So it's really just, give me some ideas about what you think you'd like to write about, be it memoir, be it fiction, be it a writing advice article. We're open to all of that because we accept all genres, except the only thing we really stay away from, honestly, is romance and anything that's partisan politics. I don't mind political philosophy at all or academic essays on those, but we don't want people screaming at each other about the mess of
pitching to you. The reason that people might say, well, why would I be pitching to a blog site? Well, you promote authors.
Yes.
And you have people who will pitch to you, and then you publish them on your site, and they immediately get the benefit of exposure to this wide network. And so for people who are seriously interested in, taking those baby steps and figuring out, hey, man, do I have anything here? Or is anybody going to respond to this? And so they can submit that to you and actually show up on the site, have their article, displayed there, and people can see it, which I think is just, fantastic. So you actually, do publish them. Talk a little bit about your, some of your, like Spotlight, your Sunday Spotlight.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, what you do with that, what the intent of that is.
Yeah, well, what we decided, Marilyn and I were talking, and we thought, well, how can we do more to really carry our end of the bargain that we pitch when we tell people that when you come to Two Drops of Ink and when you submit to us, that you're going to conjoin audiences, you're going to be a beneficiary of collaborative writing. And I said, well, so we came up with this idea that on Sundays we would call it the Sunday Spotlight. We would pick a particular author or writer and just promote them to the audience and say, hey, because we're always having new people join the site and follow the site. They may not have seen this author. This may be somebody who was published 6 months or a year ago. So we put them back in the spotlight and say, here's about here's their bio, here's all their links, here's their book. So we try, that is our way of saying, and I think this is the part where people go, what's this guy doing? He's not promoting his site, he's promoting somebody else. But yes, you really, again, the universal principle of sowing and reaping, I know that I can't outgive. And so what we've seen is writers and authors email us and say, man, I've had so many people come from your site and buy my book or start following my blog. And so that's that.
Sure.
That's what.
Yeah, it's great. And then, you also do what you call the bookshelf.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that. That's
been something that we've been a little stymied about because, if you want me to be transparent, I think we all know that when you go on Twitter and other places, there's a myriad of just books. People are, now with print on demand and other ways for people to self-publish and go around the traditional publishing platforms, there's books out there. And the hardest part that people don't realize, when you finally get through the drudgery, as you know, of editing and getting your book formatted and actually in print, now you've got to market the book. And marketing books is extremely difficult if you don't have a lot of money to put into it. If you can't put ads on large newspapers and so forth, you're not going to get out of that redwood forest that we talk about.
Right.
So I told Marilyn, I said, the one thing we're missing here is we're not helping authors to sell their book. But quite frankly, we haven't had as many submissions as we thought we would. I'll give you a quick anecdote. I remember one time going into a group as a young editor and offering to do free book reviews or help people with editing just to get some experience. I was literally plummeted and inundated with hundreds of requests from authors. But yet when we put out the bookshelf, it's like authors stand back and goes, what's this? What's in it for me? Well, what's in it for you is your book's going to get free exposure. We're not charging you for this. We're hoping that you sell books. We're hoping to conjoin audiences.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a great thing. You've been very kind to me, and my book is there on bookshelf, and you've published an article that I wrote, about the journey of my experience of writing a memoir.
Yes.
And that exposure has been great. You haven't charged me a dime for it. We built a relationship and become friends. And I'm a huge supporter, of the site, because I know that you're helping people. Yeah, and to me, that's that's what the world should be, and you're doing it. What type of, I know you're open to most all genres, but with some exception, your site will outline that for people. But talk a little bit about the submission process. They can go read all about it, but talk a little bit about the submission process if people want to submit to you.
Yeah, well, first of all, we're getting ready to do one of the things that we'd like to see more of is some fiction, flash fiction. Our site is heavily memoir, writing advice, and poetry, which we love and we're publishing, but we really would like to see some more fiction. As to the submission process, I think what people will find that's a little different with us, with me personally as editor-in-chief, is that the normal process, generally speaking, when you submit to a site or an author or an editor, the normal modern day no is silence. You just won't hear anything from them. So you pretty much assume after some time that you're not going to get published. They've rejected you. I will not allow that. I always respond, as I'm sure you've seen personally, and say, hey, we've received your submission. After a short period of review, we'll get back to you with a decision about publication. And I think authors and writers really appreciate hearing something, because most of the time they don't. I've been through that myself.
Sure.
And then secondly, if we accept you for publication, we'll also show you some of the edits that may take place if there's heavy editing needed, meaning developmental editing. If it's just grammar and syntax, we're just gonna do that. But if there's some developmental editing, we'll send it back to you and say, hey, just here's some advice, revise and resubmit. And then thirdly, when we do publish you, we will email you and let you know that you are going to be published that day so that you can interact on our threads, because we encourage authors and writers to be very interactive with our audience because people like that. And that's about as simple as it is in terms of our submission process.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, there's nothing worse than sending something out into oblivion and you don't even know if somebody looked at it, read it, or whatever. So absolutely, I would think everybody would appreciate hearing back and receiving some decision. I'd rather have no than to hear nothing.
Right.
At least you can finalize it and move on. But I mean, I think you are very kind and gracious, and I think you try very hard to encourage people. So it's unless somebody's sending you something that's just revolting, I think you're going to try and and help shape them. I agree. I do think you have a knack for spotting people. I read as much as I can of the things that get published on the site, from a variety of people. And so, I mean, I know that you're being honest and forthright about really trying to work, with people who come into the community, and I think that you are doing your best, to encourage them and help them along. Having said that, just from a editing standpoint, from a person who has now written for years, and I'm a fan of your writing too, because you have figured out how to write in a way that grabs the reader, and the reader wants to stay with what they're reading. But talk a little bit about when a person starts off and they have a major setback. Let's talk a little bit about how to keep moving them along. Where you published recently, I think the guy, it was Terry, I think, who talked about finding inspiration and that. But talk a little bit about when a person runs into those early discouraging moments, where they have it in their heart, but they're just heartbroken, that they didn't somebody didn't just fall in love immediately with what they wrote. And yet, if they'll push past that, oftentimes it will blossom for them. So speak to that person who is just discouraged, and how to keep going.
Well, first of all, I would say to them that I have been there, and anyone who has any success has been there in any endeavor. But writing is such a personal pouring out of ourselves that we can tend to take things extremely personal, and it can be very hurtful. One story in my own life that I think's funny today, but it hurt very badly at the time. I used to write a political column, and a guy told me that I was an affront to the liberal arts, which is kind of comical now, but at the time, I got to tell you, that really hurt me.
Yeah.
I had an editor who ripped me to shreds about an accent mark versus a comma or something. I can't remember what it was, but I mean, it was really over the top what this editor did. They wound up publishing what I had written. It was for a local theater, and I was writing a press release for them. But it was unnecessarily overboard. You're going to run into some of that. So what I would say to people is this: step back and take a look at rhetorical devices. one of the things that happens to some of us, and certainly in my life, I'll give you a quick example. Marilyn is a natural writer. Marilyn naturally uses rhetorical devices, metaphor, and so forth. It comes out naturally in her writing. I have to work at that. I have to do a draft, sit back and look at it and go, okay, how can I take this flat writing and add some feeling, some sensory feeling to it, using smell and sound, feeling. Those are the kinds of things that you need to be able to add to your writing that create emotional involvement from the reader and keep them turning the page. So I would say first thing is look at that. If you're having trouble getting people to pay attention to your writing, I will bet you that it has to do with the use of rhetorical devices. And just study that, read up on it, because there's a lot of good information out there about that.
Yeah, that's great advice. Some of the issues, with writing, I mean, I can only speak to a memoir because that's all I've written and published.
Mm-hmm.
I do write a blog, and I write that weekly. It's mostly inspirational, geared toward inspirational and personal empowerment, and that down that road.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I hired people to help me with the technical aspects that I needed to complete my book.
Mm-hmm.
But the story remained mine. And I don't want to be redundant for our viewers here because I did a show on this.
Mm-hmm.
But as a memoir writer,
Mm-hmm.
I find that what you run into is your own story. And oftentimes we think we have an understanding of what it is we're wanting to say, but then when you start putting it down on paper,
Mm-hmm.
In my case, I was writing, and as I was writing, it wasn't only the healing part of the answers that flowed, but for me, it was very much the questions that formed.
Mm-hmm.
And things that had nagged at me for years and years, but it never formed clearly for me to ask the right question to be able to come up with the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And so the writing process of that for me involved running into my story. And, as things healed in my life and my understanding grew, my story changed somewhat because I was now no longer writing from the perspective of being on the other side. I was now on this side, and everything looked different. And there was a period in a couple of places in my book where it was like you were trying to hit a moving target, and because your story was actually unfolding as you were writing it. And so it was it was an interesting process, and thank God I had the right people helping me, that understood message and writing and, how to communicate. And, I had a lot of message killers that were, built into the way I was writing the story, and trimming all that back and, getting to the real gist of what you were writing can be a very discouraging process because you feel like, man, am I ever going to get this right?
Yeah.
But so, the memoir, I think, is maybe a little bit different than some other aspects, of writing. But I will say this to encourage anybody who's writing a memoir. When your memoir is through with you, you'll know it.
Yeah.
And it's just a process, And so I think connecting to, people who maybe are a little farther down the road, their expertise is at a higher level. And to connect with those kinds of people who can actually, and there's not a lot of them, I think, that really want to be mentors. But what I find refreshing about Two Drops of Ink is the environment is very mentoring.
Yeah.
And people can really connect with that. And so, man, I encourage everybody to take a look at your site, to get involved at whatever level, you know, of writing that they have. And I mean, you've got something going here. And so I think it addresses needs. It helps people. They need to get past their suspicion that you're really not setting them up in any kind of way. You're genuinely wanting to help them, promote them, expose them to a wider audience. And so I really encourage people to get over there and, you know, and take a look at what, you know, what you guys are doing.
You know, Marilyn and I joke all the time about when are we gonna pull the guru stunt. You know, you got people sometimes that'll get out and in several different endeavors in life, and they'll have a flash of success, which is great. But then rather than continue on and deepen their knowledge and their wisdom and their experience in that success, they'll decide, I'm going to write a book about how to do this. And I call that the guru syndrome.
Right.
And it's very tempting because, you know, it's very tempting for when you get that first bit of success in any endeavor to say, I'm going to make some money teaching other people how to do what I've done. And we laugh about that quite often. But we're not going to do that here. We don't wish to do that here. And then reflecting back on your comments about memoir, I would just say I'm in the midst of writing mine. Why is it not done yet? Because the memories of mine are, quite frankly, painful. I haven't really been able to relive a lot of them. And so it has stymied my writing. The other thing about memoir that I think people have a tough time, our dear assistant editor Marilyn is in the process of writing hers, and she and I can talk frankly with each other, and she won't mind me saying this, but she sent me the draft. It's really good. As you know, she's a good writer. You've read her.
Right.
Marilyn, this thing reads like I'm riding through a trailer park with speed bumps, you know. And what I mean by that metaphor is sometimes people put so much information in the high spots and they don't give any depth. The whole trick to memoir is knowing what to take in and what to leave out. Leave in and what to leave out. It's very tough. But when you get to that point, now you need to elaborate. I think finding what I call the filters in your life, the major events that made a turning point, be it negative or positive, are the ones that you should try to stay with and give more depth to. And I think first chapters should always be background. You have to have context. But then from that point, you have to choose the major points in your life that were turning points. And I think that creates a success. That's a formula, one formula for a creative or a successful memoir.
Yeah, and you know, we're all different, and so we all have our different motivation for writing something like a memoir. And you know, I have read memoirs where people wrote them strictly from a humorous standpoint. They weren't in all this pain, you know, that some of us are in trying to write it. I'm like you. Mine was extremely painful, and you know, reliving moments that, you know, I had buried for years and years, and digging through and, you know, re-experiencing that pain. I mean, it was, you know, yes, it was tough. It was tough writing. Best thing I've ever done in my entire life. I mean, when I was finished, you know, it changed me tremendously. And so, I mean, if others find any help in it at all, that to me, that's just a plus. I mean, what it did for me alone was worth the writing, you know, of that whole process. But, you know, it can be funny. You know, people, they don't all have these horror stories like so many of us do. They actually had a pretty good run in their own opinion, and they're writing about that, and their take on life is from a, you know, more of a humorous standpoint, or just an uplifting standpoint, and not so much you know, challenging times and painful times to walk through. But you know, there again, for somebody who's in the writing process, Two Drops of Ink is a great place to get over and allow people to look into what you're doing and give you some great advice You know, like you said, Marilyn is a skilled writer, and yet it helps to have somebody else's eyes. You know, after a while, you like what you wrote so much you can't see holes in it anymore. And let's face it, we're writing because we all think we can do it, and we're not as good as we think we are when it comes to writing. So it really does help to have other people looking at your work to help you see things that you can't see anymore.
Yeah, and I think I always think back to Stephen King has a quote that goes something along the lines of, if you're not a reader, you will never be a good writer. And I was so thick-headed on that. I
Yeah.
love to read, but I'm a nonfiction guy. Now, my wife is a fiction reader.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I read the boring, thick, you know, informational, either politics or religious philosophy or philosophy in general. I love to read the old philosophers, things of that nature.
Yeah.
But it tends to leave, because it's so academic almost, that it tends to make your writing flat, whereas a person who reads a lot of fiction will have a better grasp on analogy and metaphor and so forth. So I would encourage people that are trying to find their voice to diversify their reading. And in that, I think they'll find their voice. I think for me, honestly, my strongest voice comes through in memoir type writing about the raw experiences of life seems to be where my voice comes out best. And everybody's different. Marilyn, on the other hand, can write fiction. She's just, some people are born naturally capable of writing.
Right. Sure.
And that's just a fact. It's like some guys can throw a baseball and some can't, you know.
Yeah. Just a gifting, just a different gifting.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, give an invitation, give your best invitation to viewers out there to your site, you know.
Yeah.
Why they should come, how they should get involved in.
Yeah, well, if you come to our site and submit your work, first of all, you're going to be treated with respect. We're not just going to blow you off. Sometimes we say no. That's pretty rare, I got to be honest with you. I've worked with a lot of writers. So if you come, and I say that because I don't want people, so many times writers are so afraid. I've been there. I know the fear of pushing that submit button,
right,
crossing every T, dotting every I. Did I do it right? And I don't want you. I'm a guy who loves writers. I have a heart for writers, and I want to help you. So if you're out there and you haven't been published before, Two Drops of Ink would be a considerable. I'm sorry, a traditional publication, because we are a widely known site in the blogosphere. It'd be a legitimate publication that you could put down in your portfolio, and we're going to help you get there. If you've got any talent at all, we're going to publish you. We're going to help you get published. If you lack a lot, I'm going to give you some good and frank advice, and I'm going to do it with a soft heart. I never hammer anybody. I don't like that. I'll give you one quick anecdote if you'd like. I had an enormous publication deal that was supposed to go through this last spring. In the midst of now, when I sent my initial manuscript to the reviewers, it was an academic essay. It got high marks from 4 PhDs, which is unusual, let me tell you.
Right.
They said, we're going to publish this. Here's a few things we need you to change. And it was with a major university, which I won't name. They switched editors on me midstream. And the new editor was quite biased against the particular topic I was writing about. And I ended up unable to work with this editor and chose to walk away from the deal. That was a tough thing for me.
Sure.
And it just reinforced to me that I am going to be as objective as I possibly can with people, and really work to help them get published.
That's great. Scott, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah.
Twodropsofink.com. It's a great site. I encourage everybody to go there. And thanks for joining us today. This is Rick on Life. I'm your host, Rick Amitin. And remember, whatever's going on in your life, just sprinkle a little love on it. We'll see you next time.